Okay, thank you for joining us on a Nagoya Players Podcast. Today, I'm very honored to be joined by a special guest, one of the original members of the Nagoya Players, Mr. Malcolm Duff. Malcolm spends his time between Nagoya and Tokyo. He is a full professor at Aichi University, teaching drama and communications, and he also teaches in Tokyo at Gakushuin University, teaching drama and theater. Malcolm was in Nagoya during the early days of the Players in 1975, and so today we thought it'd be nice to hear about that history and talk to Malcolm about his career in Japan. Welcome to the podcast, Malcolm.
Thank you, Shawn. Very nice to talk to you.
So, Malcolm, take us back to those early days. Tell us about Nagoya in the 70s and 75, and what was it like when you arrived in Japan?
Well, when I arrived in Nagoya, it was very different. There were very few foreigners, and people found us very intriguing. They were pointing at us, and gaijin was the term at those days. But it was also, in a way, an exciting time because it was a time of development. And when I came, there was a small group of foreigners, and they were quite interested in drama as a method of communication or becoming more integrated with the community. And there were especially two people who had the idea of doing some dramatic performances. Specifically Michael Horn, who was a professor at Nagoya University in those days. He definitely, I would say, gave birth to the group officially. There were various other people who also started things off, though. And I came in and I was a drama specialist, so they were very happy to have someone who could direct, perform, etc., because they were more in the literature field. And in those days, as now, I'm sure you identify with this, the biggest problem was having somewhere to base yourself as a drama group. But Michael was very lucky to have a house provided by the university with a large garden. And so our rehearsal space was the garden. And my first memory was being introduced to 6 or 7 foreigners who were already here in the garden of Michael's house, and them explaining, this is where we rehearse.
So I think that's very interesting, and even today, the Nagoya Players still has this spirit of make do.
Right.
And it's interesting to hear that in those early times, you were rehearsing in a garden.
Yes.
So what was it like in those early days, putting the group together, getting the resources, and what was driving this early group to bring these productions to stage?
I think initially it was obviously people's enthusiasm for drama and theatre. Without that basic interest, it wouldn't have happened. In terms of the practicalities, in order to do anything in a foreign country, especially in Japan in those days, there are lots of logistical problems and things like props, finding things that are correct, finding scripts even, finding other things to build scenery with, etc., etc. You can't go to jumble sales and find old costumes and things like that. Financially, of course, the group had no money, and so we all chipped in, maybe 10,000 yen to, finance the production we were doing. But initially they were fairly simple. And it was only after a few years that they were fully costumed and much more exciting in a way.
So when we look at those early shows, you show up as one of the early directors, and you produced probably one of the big early shows with Alice in Wonderland.
Right.
So we'd like to hear more about your early shows and Alice in Wonderland and how you approached community theater at this time in Japan.
Right. Well, originally Michael was very interested in Shakespeare, so did some scenes from Shakespeare. And we started to consider what would be appealing to the audience. And our audience in those days was going to be students of English, probably. And we did have some Japanese people who were almost fluent in English who also helped in the group. And Alice in Wonderland was considered to be a good production because it was our first venture into performing specifically for schools or universities. And we used Kawaii-juku in those days as our performance venue, which was a first. And Alice in Wonderland, of course, is very visual. So we had to do an awful lot of work on costume, scenery, etc. But we were lucky enough to have a lady named Karen Campbell, and she was an artist. So she definitely worked hard on that side. It was a huge amount of work, and I do remember en route we were thinking this was way too big a project for the number of people that we had. We did do some television interviews which gave some publicity and brought us out into other media. But I think it, as you know, with theatre productions, the high of the production, the excitement of the live performance is what projects you into the next project.
Yeah, listening to you tell the story of Alice in Wonderland, I have very similar feelings.
Right.
The project can get overwhelming, and there's so many people and resources involved, and there's many moments of doubt.
Yes, yes.
But you keep pushing forward, and by the time you get to stage and you see the performance take place, it fills you with that high, and you think, okay, it wasn't so bad.
Right.
Maybe we should try it again.
I think that's the thing with theatre. Most people who are involved in theatre, they sometimes feel cheated because they really want to tell the audience how much time it took to get to this stage. And there's always a discussion about ticket pricing. Is it too high? And the audience, I think, don't really understand how much enthusiasm is necessary to carry a production through to the end.
Yeah, it's in simple terms, it is a labor of love.
Yes, definitely.
And probably never truer words were spoken.
Right.
But there's a lot of love involved. So let's talk about how you got involved in theater. What was your introduction to theater, and why have you made it your career?
Well, it's interesting you use the word love, because I was lucky enough at high school and junior high school to have an English literature teacher who was in love with theatre. And she did a yearly production at school, and I don't know if you know, but in England, a production is used as an advertising project for the school. So they're pretty elaborate. And all the different faculties take part. So the costumes are done by the needlework department, etc., etc. Music departments help. So she did productions, and the first production I was ever in at junior high school was Under Milk Wood by Dylan Thomas. And I played a very small part, but I was already into reading in public and things like that. I liked doing that. But she was the person who pulled me into the theatre and encouraged me to audition at the age of 17 for the British National Theatre, Youth Theatre of Great Britain in London. And you could be sponsored, so I had a grant, and in the school holidays you went to London for several months, rehearsed and performed. And I was lucky enough in those days to be in a production. The first production I was in was Macbeth in London. And in those days, Helen Mirren started in the same company. So this really was what set me en route.
Okay, that's quite interesting. So, at that time in England, there was a foundation for arts education and art support,
Yes,
and you were fortunate enough to have great teachers and instructors that
yes,
gave you advice and showed you the path. It's 2020 now,
right.
and the state of arts education around the world, but especially in Japan, a lot of people feel that arts education isn't quite where it should be. How do you feel about arts education in
It's
Japan?
interesting you say that because actually in February I'm going to a drama teachers conference in London at the National Theatre. And I've been several times, and when I talk to young teachers these days, it's a little sad because when I became a teacher originally, drama was an accepted subject on the school curriculum. They started A levels, so it became an academic subject, and it was booming. It was growing and growing. Now again, authorities are beginning to cut down on budgets for drama, for arts. They're beginning to pull back. And a lot of drama teachers these days find they have less support than 10 or 20 years ago.
Okay, so as a drama teacher, you spent how many years teaching drama now?
Well, altogether, we're now talking at least 45, maybe.
45 years.
Yeah.
So I'm sure you've seen kind of peaks and valleys
Yes, yes.
in this world. But why teach drama? Why do you feel this is important for students to learn?
Well, what becomes obvious is that drama is basically relevant to everyday life in every way. And in the British education system, it's always been on the curriculum as a form of therapy as well as an art form. And often students who were less able or who had certain psychological problems would take drama classes and were very enthusiastic about drama. And these were considered to help them in their everyday life. So we do today perform in our everyday lives. We have interviews, we have communication with people. And so it's still a basic skill which we need, having confidence to stand up in front of people or to show yourself or to analyze personality traits.
I think that's very beautifully said. I think people don't realize the tangible benefits of learning
Right.
drama and stagecraft, and it does help you navigate the world and
Yeah.
at least understand the world. You know, I find one of the most beautiful parts of drama is learning new points of view.
Yes.
When you have to move in and out of characters and you have to move in and out of motivations,
Yes.
when in a stage play, it kind of teaches you. So not everyone thinks the same. Not everyone feels the same.
That's right.
And learning how to deal with those different points of view helps you in the real world.
Yes. And in fact, in one of my lectures, which is about musicals and the relevance today, I always teach the students the value of musicals. They're sometimes considered to be less artistic, but in fact, they're very good at bringing out difficult subjects. So under the, shall we say, the mask of rhythm and musical content, the audience are encouraged to consider difficult topics, which they wouldn't necessarily normally consider because they would find them too heavy.
Yeah, actually, I was listening to musical soundtracks this past week, and from the 1930s, and what you just said, in the lyrics of these songs, they were
Yes.
bringing up, you know, kind of social ills of the time and
Yes,
and kind of what was going on in their world, and these were quite dark things, but they
Right.
were sung at high notes. So
that's a good way of saying it, yeah.
it was very interesting to see how it was woven in, and like, did they
Yes.
really just mention that?
Yeah. When I watch Rodgers and Hammerstein, I'm amazed at how before its time. It actually is. It's incredibly modern and risque.
Yes, that's a really good point.
Yeah.
So, you're not only based in Nagoya, you're also based in Tokyo.
Yes.
And you've also been a part of the Tokyo International
That's
Players.
right.
And maybe you've spent more time with them than the Nagoya Players.
Yes,
is that right?
yes.
So, Tokyo International Players, in a lot of ways, is a gold standard for English theater in Japan.
Right.
They're over 100 years old, countless productions.
Yes.
So, can you tell us a little bit what it's like working with them and what you do with them?
Well, again, you know the problems of having a theatre company. In Tokyo, the Tokyo International Players, as it's now called, basically had a board of directors, 12 people, and they were the people who ran it. And then they would do 4 productions a year, which was a huge undertaking. And it had a certain permanence. But as you've seen, society changes with the introduction of the internet, other forms of entertainment, etc. Tokyo International Players has had difficulties in adjusting its performances to today's audience. And they've gone from sometimes 4 productions a year to 2. They do whatever they feel is going to be successful. Okay. And also the population is more fluid, I think. A lot of young people come to Tokyo now for 2 or 3 years and go. Whereas when I joined, the expat community was very much people in large companies here for 10 years. There was a much stronger base. Therefore, it provided financially, artistically, a lot more confidence, a lot more security in order to base a company on.
So with this, we'll say, wealth of knowledge, 45 years teaching drama, experience in Japan as in production, putting these shows together, seeing the ebb and flow of everything. You mentioned just now, like, the needs of theater have changed, the wants of the audience have changed. So what's your advice to theater groups now? What should they be focusing on? What should they be gearing themselves to and for?
Well, I think the first point is a lot of people who are not specialists really are attracted to names. If they recognize a name, they will go and see it. If they don't give it a second chance. So my advice to a starting group or a developing group is, at least in your season, have one production that has a name which everyone say, yes, I know that. Secondly, I think there's a desire for family productions. A lot of people these days are very much into going with the family. It's much more unlikely that a single person will go because they tend to go on the internet. They have much more variety available to them with television, internet companies, etc. However, I will say that live performance is still existing. And as we see the Olympics, the opening ceremonies develop more and more into drama performance, it proves that live performance is of value and still very much enjoyed by people.
So just one final question then. For the young generation, a lot of young people today are fascinated by the entertainment industry, from music to acting. What's your advice for young performers? Why should they spend time learning drama, or should they hone their skills to be more commercially viable? What advice would you give to a young person that wants to start out in this world?
I definitely think they should understand the value of drama in everyday life. So they should view it not as a road to stardom, but as a way of honing their skills. And even if they go into a commercial area, presentations, customer presentations, giving interviews, etc., representing companies, all of these skills are valuable. And indeed, we even see on the internet now with selfies, with YouTube, all of this new direction very much relies on performance skills to make it successful. And I think it's interesting that one of the fragilities of young people today is the fact that they don't have the skills of direct communication and self-confidence. And therefore, when they come up against some barrier, they're very fragile, much more fragile than I think my generation.
Yeah, I think a lot of us who are a bit older have that sense that there's a softening and a sensitivity, but I think the younger generation is quite capable. Just how do we get that potential out of them, and how do we kind of make them wiser to the world, and
right,
tougher for the world, the larger world?
I think it will happen naturally because I already feel that trend, that in my own students who are very much into the internet and now, of course, sending pictures of their lunch, their dinner to their friends, they're beginning to realize and to find that there's also a loneliness that comes with that. Therefore, direct contact is also necessary.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent point. And bringing it back to live performance, I think this is one of the hidden but very important points of impact live performance can have. When you're in that same space with the actors and you're hearing their voice,
yes,
and you can't escape the room,
yes,
it forces you to deal with what's happening, whether that's a musical or a drama or a
yes,
tragedy. You don't have the luxury of a screen between you.
precisely, or the barrier of the screen between you.
Yeah, so you have to face this reality,
Right.
And I think that's quite powerful for people that experience it for the first time.
Yeah.
And that's why I think we should still be investing in theater and live performance.
Yes. I do think the most important thing is that the first performance that you take young people to is a good one, because that will fashion everything for the future. And it's interesting with my own students. I have students from 35 years ago who come back, and they're not English specialists. They took it out of interest or necessity for a credit. And they come back and we talk about the productions they were in, and they stay. Those memories have stayed. Yeah. And the drama of the production and the effort and the team spirit is something which really stays with you.
Yeah, very well said. I think that's why we do it, is to implant those memories, give them that experience that they can carry with them for the rest of their lives.
Right.
Well, Malcolm, I think we're out of time. Is there anything you'd like to add before we finish today?
No, I would just like to say I admire all the people who work hard to bring these things into the world of the public. And, please carry on. And the more people that have enthusiasm, the easier it is for the one or two who keep their heads above water. But definitely, as an audience member or a participant, drama will never disappear and lose its place. So join in and take part.
All right. Thank you so much for your time, Malcolm.
Thank you very much.